If we learned one thing from the Crowdstrike debacle, is that mishaps can always happen. And while less than 1% of the Windows devices was hit, the fact remains that the economic and sometimes health impact was significant. Now, several things went wrong on the 19th of July 2024, and not all of them went wrong at Crowdstrike. So, how can you protect yourself from these in the future? Now, this short explainer talks about the simple basic processes that safeguard your environment. The main rule, of course, is that updates should never be installed directly in production, which is what seems to have happened here. But that actually happens at the client end. Now, first look at the supplier end. Now, there are several videos out there that talk around the internal workings of the Crowdstrike software and its channel files, so I won't go into that here. I will focus purely on process. And so obviously, before you release something, you test it first. And that is according to some reports where things already went wrong. But to understand how that could have happened, we need to look at how companies typically work with releases and patches, or more generally, changes. Changes to IT systems typically go through what are called DTAP stages. First you roll out something in development, D, then test, T, then acceptance, A, and only then you go to production, P, DTAP. That allows IT and business staff to catch issues well before they cause any harm. Now obviously, this also supposes that you know what to test and how to test it, but that's yet another topic. Let's stay focused on process. The more important the change, the more approvals that it needs. And now sometimes this is mistakenly seen as overhead. So sometimes changes are rated as having low impact because, quote unquote, it's only a single file that changes, or it's a simple procedure and we've done it a million times. The added benefit then is that typically these changes don't need to go through the rigorous complete approval process. That, however, is a fallacy. A change's impact cannot be determined by the effort that it takes to make the change. You need to assess a change by the impact it may have on the production systems, especially if it fails. I read in a Reuters report that this may have been a contributing factor because it was just a patch. And this may also explain why the release was not done in a staggered fashion, as would be the case with a normal release. Typically, dev and test releases are done in-house. Upon OK, they are then released to selected paying customers who subscribe to beta or UAT, that's user acceptance test releases, so that they can test it in their lower environments. Perhaps a low impact analysis caused this release to happen immediately in production. And now this is why we also need to consider the client processes. It's tempting to auto-install updates from vendors, as this relieves IT staff and business users from the extra workload associated with repeatedly testing a release. Not doing so, however, will lead sooner or later, and in this case, it happened on July 19th, to disaster. Early comments on the internet alluded to the balance between protection against zero-day vulnerabilities and stability, but that is also a fallacy. Even when a change is deemed so urgent that it requires an immediate release, like in the case of a red alert update, like for instance for detected vulnerabilities that have already exploits in the wild, there is what is called the emergency release process. Companies should have a policy and procedure for dealing with even these very urgent updates. Now, these warnings are typically received by the customer via their security operations centers. They're called SOC. The SOC then evaluates the warning as fast as within the hour sometimes and sends out update requirements to all of the affected business units within the company. When at all possible, still first test the update in a lower environment and only then move it into production. If the urgency is such that either patch immediately or be hacked immediately, then there are other options besides an uncontrolled release. And in that case, another process will have kicked off within the company already anyway. But it looks like urgency was not present either. And lastly, if your UAT environment is not representative for your production environment, then you need to work on that too. Another line of defense is to stagger the release. First do a single server, then a few, and then per importance tier. That way, even if the bug or malicious code still eluded all of the previous testing, you'll only brick one or a few machines, not your entire machine park. So in summary, the supplier and the client have to have the right procedures in place to safeguard production systems. On the supplier side, be transparent about the change potential impact, especially were it to go wrong. Test properly. Use staggered releases to subscribe client systems. On the client side, you have to have a clear change process in place. Test properly in the lower environments. Do not auto-install updates on production systems, and control the release by staggering your rollout across your machine park. I hope you found this useful, and I hope to see you again in another video.